The Anglo-Saxon epic poem Beowulf was written down by a Christian monk between 700 and 750 AD, but the story is much older, from sometime around the 5th century. It's about Beowulf, the strongest and most skilled warrior to ever lift a sword, and it's about the three monsters he battles. As I have talked about before, monsters do more than just kill people, although they tend to do a lot of that. Monsters ask us questions about ourselves. Questions that deep down we've been suppressing because we'd rather not face them. By the time the monsters turn up, these suppressed ideas have gotten out of control. Monsters are an embodiment of our doubts about ourselves. Their form and behavior show us what might perhaps be a reflection of ourselves that we really don't want to look at. They turn up and intrigue us when our collective identities are in crisis. If my theory is correct, the three Anglo-Saxon monsters in Beowulf are an embodiment of Anglo-Saxon doubts about themselves. The forms and behaviors of these monsters would have unsettled and intrigued the original audience, because monsters don't just represent otherness. There's always something creepily honest about them. By studying the monsters in Beowulf, then, we can perhaps catch a glimpse of who the Anglo-Saxons wanted to be, and the points at which they themselves wondered if they were perhaps falling a little short. Beowulf is an Anglo-Saxon story. Anglo-Saxon society was born in warfare. The warrior occupied two distinct worlds, the battlefield and the mead hall. On the battlefield, he fought his enemies, and in the mead hall, he gathered with his brothers and drank mead. The Roman historian Tacitus used the term comitatus to describe this band of brothers who were bonded together in battle and in their sworn loyalty to their chieftain. In return for loyalty, generosity was expected from the chieftain in return. Beowulf's first monster is Grendel. Let me set the stage. Hrothgar, the chieftain of the Danes, has built a mead hall. It is big and beautiful, and he calls it Heorot. In the version we have today, Hrothgar's warriors gathered in Heorot and sang songs of praise to the Creator. Grendel hated that. It hurt his ears. The text says it harrowed him to hear the din. Tolkien suggests that southern monsters, like the Cyclops, Polyphemus, and Medusa, were God-begotten. But the northern monsters are enemies of God. Grendel fits that bill. He hates praise and worship songs. He's a descendant of Cain. The first recorded sin in the Bible is fratricide. Cain kills his brother Abel and is cursed for it. This is Grendel's lineage, in a culture that was all about lineage. When the goings-on in Heorot really get on Grendel's nerves, he comes in the middle of the night, rips the door off its iron hinges, kills 30 Dane warriors as they sleep, and hauls their corpses back to his lair. Grendel certainly represents otherness, that which is not us in Anglo-Saxon society. He lives alone, isolated. He's not part of the community and instead inhabits the wild and the dark moors. He has no known father, he fights with no weapons, and he's an enemy of the mead hall. Grendel regularly returns to wreak havoc on the Danes for 12 years. The warriors abandoned Heorot, and the most glorious of mead halls sits empty. Far away, Beowulf, the great Geat warrior, hears of these ravages and decides to help the Danes with their Grendel problem. After their arrival and some drinking and boasting, Beowulf and his men fake sleep in Heorot that night. Predictably, Grendel comes eager to drink Geat blood. He has no idea that this night will not be like his previous visits. After killing one young warrior, he grabs for Beowulf, but Beowulf, who vows to use no sword, grabs for him. Beowulf takes hold of his arm. Long story short, in his cowardly attempts to free himself, Grendel flees with Beowulf still holding onto his arm. And that's fatal. As you read the text, you can see that Grendel isn't simply a villain. Grendel is a monster in that in some subtle and important ways he is a monstrous reflection of the Anglo-Saxon warrior ideal. The author of Beowulf seems to have seen this as well. Both Beowulf and Grendel are referred to with the same word, Hildernik, which means something like warrior, and both are described as aglika, meaning something like formidable. The same words to describe Grendel are used to describe Beowulf. What makes monsters intriguing is not their otherness, but their sameness, how they are like us. Grendel is like Beowulf, the greatest of all heroes. So what aspects of their identity are the Anglo-Saxons suppressing? The monster will tell us. Here are my speculations. Warriors want to gain glory from battle. They didn't want to die in their sleep. Where's the glory in that? Death in battle is better, but they didn't seek a quick, violent death on the field because that would end their quest for martial glory. Grendel brought about the worst kind of death for these guys. He gave them an inglorious, violent death in their sleep, while they were still young. But there's more. Like I said earlier, the life of the Anglo-Saxon warrior revolved around two places, the mead hall and the battlefield. These were distinct. You ate and drank at the first, and you fought and killed at the second. Grendel erased the boundary between those two spaces. He didn't eat and drink with his brothers at the hearth of the mead hall. He ate the flesh and drank the blood of his brothers at the hearth of the mead hall. Monstrous behavior indeed. But there's more. Don't warriors, in essence, kill brothers? Other people's brothers? Bands of warrior brothers kill the brothers of others. Doesn't this make them all a little Grendelish? And one more thing. Victory over one's enemies was at the center of Anglo-Saxon warrior culture. Martial victory was the point. How much did the cause matter, or the method, as long as you won? Grendel killed warriors, and he was victorious. That's what they wanted to do. What difference does the location of the victory make? How often had the warriors themselves blurred the lines to gain an advantage over other groups of men, just like themselves? Grendel just took the next step. Was he really so different? Wasn't he like them just a little? These are the kinds of things you don't want to think on too long if you're an Anglo-Saxon. But they couldn't shake these thoughts and doubts. Because no one wanted to talk about them, they turned up in this story in the form of Grendel. Not long after Grendel was dealt with, his mother shows up. Grendel's mother is the second monster that Beowulf faces. Grendel is dead, and both the Danes and the Geats celebrate Beowulf's victory over Grendel. A scop, or storyteller, takes the stage and tells a story involving Hildebert, a Danish princess married to a Frisian king named Finn. I always like this bit because I am Frisian. Anyway, a fight breaks out between the Danes and the Frisians, and Hildeburh's Frisian warrior son and Danish king brother are both killed. They keep a lid on the violence all winter, but in the spring the Danes rise up against Finn and the violence continues. Blood feuds were a big problem in this world of warring family groups. In a blood feud, revenge goes back and forth, and a whole bunch of warriors are killed, so they tried hard to break the cycle of violence. One method was the Wehrgild, or man price, a compensation payment to appease the most recently offended party. But underlying it all is the assumption that someone must pay something for the death of a family member. Grendel was killed by Beowulf, the representative of the Dane-Geat coalition. It's not surprising that someone from Grendel's family would seek vengeance for his death. Enter Grendel's mother. She attacks the good guys. Beowulf pursues her to her underwater lair. She's super tough, but Beowulf kills her with an enchanted sword, presumably from one of her former victims. Yay, Beowulf! He killed another evil monster. But remember, monsters aren't that simple. Here's the thing. This wicked evil monster kills one man only, Aschir, Hrothgar's closest advisor. A life for a life. It seems like she's playing by the rules of the blood feud. Someone must pay, someone paid, done. Just before they leave to go kill her, Beowulf gives voice to the heroic code that shapes their life. He says, "It is always better to avenge dear ones than to indulge in mourning." But isn't this exactly the code that Grendel's mother upheld? If he's a hero, she's a hero. If she's a monster, he's a monster. With Aschir's death, everything is even, but then Beowulf extends the blood feud by killing her, and in doing so he presumably wipes out the whole family. This is the feared end of the blood feud. If it keeps going, an entire family could be eliminated, and families are important in this culture, so they tried hard to prevent that from happening. But this is exactly what our hero does. And then there's this little fact that she's a woman. Are warriors supposed to kill women? And let's not forget Hildebert, the story that precedes the coming of Grendel's closest relative, who happens to be his mother. Is there a connection between the supposed monster and the princess who loses all her male relatives, including a son, because of a feud between her brother and her husband's family? Grendel's mother only kinda represents otherness. She possesses too many qualities that are uncomfortably familiar to the Anglo-Saxon audience, who are very familiar with both a grieving mother and the next of kin seeking a culturally justified revenge. What makes her a monster is that she exposes some of these suppressed inconsistencies in the Anglo-Saxon collective identity. And this is what makes her so intriguing to the people who heard the story. The third monster is a dragon. The battle with the dragon occurs long after the fights with the first two monsters. Beowulf has become the king of the Geats and has ruled wisely for 50 years. The relationship between Anglo-Saxon warriors and their chieftain was quite simple. An admirable warrior was supposed to possess martial skills to achieve victory in battle, unflinching courage in the face of death, and unswerving devotion to his lord. In exchange for their loyalty, the king was expected to be generous, conferring rings and swords and other valuable gifts upon his warriors. So a bad king was one that was stingy, and a bad warrior was one that was cowardly and disloyal. In the episode with the dragon, we find both these monstrous behaviors. The dragon broods on a vast treasure. He has no interest in using the treasure for anything, he just wants to possess it. One of Beowulf's servants steals a jeweled cup from the dragon's hoard, a veritable drip in the ocean of treasure, and true to character, the dragon goes crazy and takes extreme offense. Beowulf has decided to go out and kill it before it can do any harm to his people. The dragon is the foil to the ideal of the Anglo-Saxon chieftain, who is to be generous above all things. J.R.R. Tolkien knew Beowulf very well, and we can see its influence all over his books. Smaug from The Hobbit exhibits the same characteristics as does Beowulf's dragon. What I find interesting is the echoes of Beowulf in Tolkien's dwarf chieftain, Thorin Oakenshield. The expectation of Thorin is the same as that of an Anglo-Saxon leader. He is to be generous. After the dragon is killed, Thorin broods upon the treasure, going to war with elves and men who have legitimate claims on the treasure. Thorin is more dragon than king, and he is judged for it. Beowulf comes out looking good in this regard. But I wonder if there was ever really an Anglo-Saxon chieftain that lived up to his warrior's standard of generosity. Or a chieftain who didn't resent just a little having to give up such a significant portion of his valuable possessions. The dragon is the embodiment of these all too real human feelings. Anyway, Beowulf and his faithful warriors climb up to the dragon's lair, and when they see the monster, the warriors flee in terror. As we've said, the most disgraceful and dishonorable thing a warrior could do is run away from a fight. But they did it. The dragon was too much for them. This situation brings out the suppressed question in the hearts of the warriors attending the telling of this story. Would I too have fled at the sight of such a creature? Just to ask the question opens up the possibility, and that's why the fight with the dragon was so intriguing to the original audience. Or would I have been like Wiglaf? He's the one warrior who stayed by Beowulf's side. Beowulf is fatally wounded by a poisonous bite to the neck. Wiglaf stops the dragon's ability to breathe fire with his sword, and Beowulf delivers the fatal blow with his dagger into the beast's neck. Beowulf has lived up to the ideal of a generous king. He even demands that the treasure be used to build a lighthouse to help people navigate and arrive safely. So he remains generous to the end, even beyond the end. But his fight with the dragon creates a situation in which all his warriors but one fail to live up to their ideal of loyalty and courage. There may be one more meaning to Beowulf's fight with the dragon that intrigued the original audience because it touches upon another suppressed truth. Death and evil cannot be overcome. Oh, you can try to rid the world of evil, and this may lead to some success, but ultimately we will never succeed. So is all this warrior stuff rather pointless? Each of Beowulf's monsters, or the situations they create, touch on the suppressed doubts festering in the collective identity of the original audience. That's why these monsters take the form that they do. That's why they resonate with the listeners. Our monsters are zombies, and they function the same way. But before we get to zombies, let's talk about the wonderful monster of the 19th century, the vampire. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.